As you work in Photoshop, you'll have the option to create and save images in a number of different file formats. The good news is we only really need to be concerned with a few of them. The first format we're going to take a look at is the one that you're going to run into most often, and that's the JPEG file format. Let's open one up. We'll go to File, Open. In the Project Files folder in Chapter 1, let's open up the Fuji High-Res image. Now this image is in the JPEG format, and we can verify that at the top of the document window. We see after the file name Fuji High-Res, we see .jpg, which is the abbreviation for JPEG. Now JPEGs have two big advantages. They create very small images. They take up very little space on your hard drive, and they are universally accepted. There's virtually no software on the planet that handles images that cannot read, open, or otherwise handle a JPEG image. You can open a JPEG in your web browser. You could even place a JPEG in your Microsoft Word document if you wanted to. So there's really almost nothing that you can't do with a JPEG in terms of putting it into other applications. The downside to this is that the JPEG achieves its great savings in file size by compressing your image. It's what's known as a lossy file format, meaning that it reduces the file size by throwing away information about your image. Now let's take a look at how that works. With this image open, we're going to go to File, Save As. We're going to save a copy of this. We're going to keep the format at JPEG. I'll go down here and click the Save button. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite the other file. I'm going to hit Replace because we're actually going to stop before it writes it. Under the JPEG Options dialog box, we have a quality setting. At 12, which is the maximum setting, we can see below the Preview checkbox, we have a file size of 1.3 megabytes. That's what we'll get if we choose the maximum quality setting for JPEG. If, on the other hand, we drag this slider all the way to the left to get the smallest possible file size, we can see now under the Preview box that our image size has been reduced to 62.1 kilobytes. That's just over a half of 1/10 of a megabyte. Fantastic, you might think. I could fit a gazillion of these on my hard drive, but look at what's happened to the image document window. With this preview button on, I'll turn it off so you can see the image that we started with. Nice, smooth, seamless transitions. If I turn the preview on, you can see that our image now is completely wrecked. We've got very muddy waters, we've got skies that have blotches of cyan and magenta all through them, and it's just completely destroyed. So we've got a small file size, that's great, but we've wrecked the image quality. Now, of course, you can go somewhere in between these two extremes. You could move the quality settings somewhere more in the middle where you've got a decent file size, but you have an acceptably good preview of the image. But that's the delicate dance that you'll have with JPEGs. Either you get the smallest possible file size and the quality is bad, or you keep as much quality as you can, but you don't get as much savings in the file size reduction. Now let's just hit Cancel. Second file format we're going to talk about is a TIFF format. This is also very popular. Let's open up a TIFF. We'll go to File, Open. Again, in our Chapter 1 folder, let's select the file called TIFF. Now, the great advantage of TIFFs is that they don't throw away image information. You're not going to get a small file size like a JPEG, but you're not going to lose any image quality. TIFFs also have the advantage of being able to store dynamic information in your image, such as layer masks, adjustment layers, 16-bit files, all these fun, super cool things that we're going to cover in later chapters. Those can all be saved in the TIFF format. None of those things that I just mentioned can be saved in a JPEG format. So once you really start to work in Photoshop and do amazing things with layer masks and selections and adjustment layers, then you're going to be really looking at a TIFF file format. Let's see what happens if you go to create a TIFF or save a TIFF. We'll go to File, Save As. We're going to select this. We're going to keep the file format at TIFF. We'll hit the Save button, and like with JPEG, it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite the other file. I'm going to hit Replace because we're actually going to stop before it writes it. Under Image Compression, the first choice is None. That means that this TIFF format will apply no compression to the image. The file size will not get smaller, but we've not lost any quality. Now here's the sort of magic button. Right below it is LZW. Now this does apply some image compression, but it's a lossless compression. It will make the file size smaller where it can, but it will not throw away any image information. How it does this can only be answered by the Adobe engineers and their super secret ways of committing algorithms to pixels. But the upshot is we can get a slightly smaller file size. We're not losing any image quality. It'll be nowhere near as small as a JPEG, but every little bit can help. So you've got those two great options for TIFFs. We'll hit Cancel for now. And so we've got JPEGs, we've got TIFFs. Another lossless file format is the native Photoshop file format, which is a PSD. Let's go back to File, Save As. And this time for the image, instead of saving it as a TIFF, we're going to choose, all the way at the top, the Photoshop option. Notice that in the Save As box at the top of this window, the file name is now appended with .psd. That's the abbreviation for the Photoshop file document. Now, I don't want you to be under the impression that because you're working in Photoshop, you have to save the file with a Photoshop file format. That is not true. We can think, for our purposes, of TIFFs and PSD files as being virtually identical. There's no one big advantage over the other. Everything that a TIFF can hold, a PSD can hold, and vice versa. The one advantage pointing to a TIFF, and one reason I recommend it, is that it is more universally recognized than a PSD file. Obviously, Photoshop can read PSD files, but if you have to ever open the image up in another program or place it in another program, sometimes they can't read PSD files, but the chance of programs reading TIFFs are pretty good. It's maybe not quite as universal as a JPEG, but it's a close second. Let's just cancel out of that. Those are the three file formats that we're really going to be talking about with photorealistic images. One file format that might be familiar to you web designers out there is the GIF format, .gif. One big downside, however, is that it has a very limited color palette. We talked in the first lesson about how images can hold millions of colors with all the permutations of red, green, and blue that each pixel can have. A GIF can only hold 256 colors in any given image. So if you're doing photographs or any other photorealistic images with smooth, subtle gradations, you really want to stick with either JPEGs, TIFFs, or PSDs if you want, but I'm going to recommend TIFFs for that.